Opening the Board of Adjustment meeting. We'll start with the pledge to the flag. Okay, a few items before we get started. Please sign in at the door if you have not already done so. You will also find detailed handout, a step-by-step procedure we follow. If you wish to take one, please put any electronic devices on silent mode. Also, please note that all testimony is recorded. Members of the Board of Adjustment are appointed by the County Board of Commissioners, with one member from each of the 5 commissioner districts. Land Services staff is here to assist the Board of Adjustment with its duties. The task of the Board of Adjustment is to consider requests for variances and appeals from an order, requirement, or decision made by a county zoning official in accordance with state law and county ordinance. Each request is considered on its own merit. The burden of proving a practical difficulty rests with the applicant. If a variance is granted, it is granted to the land, not to the landowner. There is a protocol for how we will proceed tonight. For each variance request on the agenda, you will hear a staff report, hear testimony from the applicants, and then the board will discuss and gather more information as needed. Next, I will ask if there's anyone in the audience wishing to speak to the request. I will ask each party to come to the podium, state their name and address for the record, give their testimony. Please be as factual as possible and direct all statements and questions to me. After all testimony is complete, I will close the public hearing portion of the process. The board will then review and discuss the case in terms of finding of fact criteria as required by the Minnesota statute and county ordinance. We will have a series of votes to discuss whether conditions be made and have a final vote to approve or deny the request based on those findings. After this final vote on your request, you may leave if you wish. Okay, we have one item on the agenda tonight. If the applicants would please come forward and get close up to a microphone. They're Timothy and Christine Morris, 12831 92nd Avenue, Little Falls. This is an after-the-fact application for a variance to continue a barn within the setback to the road right-of-way, located in Pike Creek Township. So please state your name.
Tim Borles.
Chris Borles.
Thank you. Staff report?
I'm ready.
All right.
Okay. This is an after-the-fact variance to construct a hog barn within setback to a road right-of-way. This is located in Section 33 of Pike Creek Township. The ordinance reference for this request is 1208.1, and that requires a 200-foot setback from the road right-of-way. Here's a plat map of the township, and the red dot is the location of the parcel. And then here is the variance request received from the applicant. Then here's an aerial photograph of the property. And then some site photos taken at the site visit. Again, the property is in Section 33 of Pike Creek Township, and the applicant owns and lives on this 40-acre parcel. A poultry barn, no longer in use for that purpose, existed on the property up until July 2022 when it burned down. And then here is an aerial photograph of the old barn. In March 2023, the Land Services Department received a complaint that an addition to the southern accessory structure had been constructed without permitting. While researching that complaint, it was discovered that the barn on the north end of the property that had burnt down had been replaced with another barn of the same dimension, and no permitting was on file. And then here's a photograph of that new barn. This property was not a registered feedlot, so it was necessary to find out from the property owner how the buildings were being utilized to determine what must be done to come into compliance with the ordinance. A notice of violation was sent to the property owner. Shortly after receipt of the letter, Mr. Borles called the Land Services Department to discuss the violations. He stated that the previous poultry barn had been converted into a low-density hog barn. When it burned, he constructed a new one to continue farming. A review of the animal units determined that he must be registered as a Tier 1 feedlot. Since the building was being utilized as an animal holding area for a Tier 1 feedlot, the feedlot setbacks apply. The hog barn is 69 feet from the county road right-of-way. A 200-foot setback is required. The applicant is requesting an after-the-fact variance to establish a Tier 1 feedlot within setback to the road right-of-way, and that would be a 131-foot encroachment. The county engineer did provide a comment on this, and that was included in your packet. The applicable comprehensive land use plan goals is agriculture, goal A1, objective 1, objective 4 and 8, goal A2, A3 and A4, and then objective 1 and 3. And the applicable comprehensive water plan goals and objectives is surface water goal, objective A, land use and development goal, objective A. 24 notices were sent. One comment in favor of the request was received prior to the public hearing. That was from Rose Hubner, and she stated she has no issues with the request. All right, and then here are your finding of fact and decision questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Amy. Do the applicants have anything to add to the staff report?
What was that?
Do you have anything to add at this time to Amy's report?
No.
Okay. Okay, Board of Adjustment members, questions for the applicant, staff, experts?
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Barb.
okay, back when the chicken barn was going and it was that capacity, how many animal units would have that been considered?
Depends on how it was stocked on those two-tier barns. It probably would have been still under a tier, less than a Tier 1 feedlot.
Okay, because I would have thought with that many birds and all, with that
It
size.
depends on
probably
how many animal units it was. It was at a layer barn?
It was at one time, and then it was
Okay.
broilers at the end.
Yeah, so it may have evolved.
Okay.
But it was never on our radar screen, so I don't know.
So the next question is, being it burnt down and he would build, did he need a permit for doing this barn or not? Because he used existing foundation and everything.
Even when you're replacing a building, you still need a land use permit to construct any building, whether it's a replacement building or not. Then the added layer of that is the use of the building then, because it was now to the level of a Tier 1 feedlot, then we would have had the discussion about setback.
So if he would have built it exactly the way it was, he still would have had, need to get a permit and going through that, correct?
Correct, and would have needed a variance if it was being utilized as an animal holding area.
Even though it was in use for all that time?
That's correct.
Okay. That answers some of my questions for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Barb.
Mr.
Anybody
Chair.
else?
Question for the
Go ahead,
applicant.
John.
I'm trying to get my years right. So chickens in the 80s,
Yep.
and then when did you go from chickens to hogs? What year was that?
10 years ago roughly is when we started with hogs.
And then it burned in July of 22.
Yep.
Okay. And so, Mr. Chair, question for staff.
Go ahead.
So the second that converted to hogs, that would have been a different request for its use. Or it would, even with an existing barn like that, if they say, hey, we want to go to Tier 1 10 years ago, those rules were still in place at that point.
Couple of things. Was there a lapse between chickens and hogs?
Yes.
Okay, so there was chickens, then it sat vacant, and then hogs went in. And so there's kind of two things that we deal with when it comes to feedlots. One, we look at the location and use of the buildings. And then on the feedlot side of things, we look at how large the feedlot is to determine whether or not it needs to be registered as a feedlot under Minnesota feedlot rules. Way back when those laying barns were first in, the animal unit numbers, because of the weight of the chickens, wasn't high enough to need to be registered as a Tier 1 feedlot. So that's probably why it flew under the radar there. We probably were not aware that it was switched over. Then usually when it goes to when it switches from layers, then usually we're at a tier 1, but that doesn't sound like it was known that happened. And so then it would have been addressed then. And then when there's a lapse, you don't hold your feedlot status forever. So when that use discontinues and there's 5 years that lapse between, they would have had to reestablish that feedlot anyway, regardless of chickens having been in there or not.
Understood. Mr. Chair, last question. So there was a complaint about a different structure?
Yes, there was an addition put onto another structure on the property, and that's what got us looking at this in the first place.
Okay. And that, what was, I'm just
That
curious.
appeared to be a barn also, so that's why we had the question. But then it was brought to our attention that the barn that we were seeing in the aerial photograph, the big barn,
Yeah,
had been replaced.
understood. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John. Anybody else?
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Brad.
we did receive a letter from the county engineer talking about some review of both operational containment of animals, manure, feed, equipment hazards, all present regarding the right-of-way and the traveling public, and we should review that. So I wanted to just bring that up for you to have an opportunity to tell us kind of what your operational plan is that may address some of those concerns of the county engineer.
Mr. Chair,
Oh, go ahead, Amy.
for the benefit of the applicant, would you like me to read the comment?
I think that'd be a good idea.
Okay. All right, so this is from the county engineer. I spoke with Public Works staff about the barn's location and history. Historically, when it was in operation prior to it being rebuilt, Public Works did not have any issues with its operation inside the limits set by ordinance. It is unfortunate that the structure was not rebuilt to meet the current ordinances. I would recommend to allow Mr. Boros to continue his operation since he is using the previous footprint and the past history has been favorable. It is imperative that the operation does not infringe closer to the highway. Operational containment of animals, manure, feed, equipment hazards all present potential issues as well as safety issues for the traveling public. I recommend reviewing the hazards of the operation and where feasible, utilize areas away from the highway as well as no use of the highway right-of-way. In the unlikely event additional right-of-way is needed, concessions may need to be made by the property owner due to the allowance of this variance. If there is another event that requires the barn to be rebuilt, the facility shall be built to meet the ordinances at that time. These comments should stay with the property if it is operated by someone else in the future.
Okay. You want Brent to repeat the question he had, or?
So what are you,
Well, based upon that letter, I'd just like for you to, if you look right at the center of that paragraph, what is your plan with operational containment of the animals, your manure plan, feed plan, equipment hazards, all of those issues regarding that encroachment, because that's what we're looking at here, is that encroachment towards the road right-of-way.
Yep.
And that's the concern of the county engineer. And then in the future, he addresses, maybe we should make sure that this is of the record. So if you could maybe just talk to us a little bit about that.
okay. Well, the feed tanks are gonna be in the middle of the barn, so there won't be nothing on that end. Then the manure, we haul it, there's a field, next to the barn, and there's one across the road, and then if we have to, we pile it across the road. And, animals stay in the barn, nothing's ever outside. Everything stays in the barn.
Parking of machinery?
Well, behind the barn, though, by where the grain bins are, we park our gravity boxes and stuff there, otherwise nothing gets parked by the road at all. We don't put no round bales, nothing by the road usually.
Okay.
Everything stays away from there. So a person can see, that's one of the big things. Not only for us, but for other people too.
Does that answer your question, Brent?
Yeah, and I guess the concern is obviously public safety and the road right-of-way. Is it your belief that you probably won't be using any portion of the road right-of-way there?
Well, we cross the road to the
Other,
field.
but I mean for parking and
No,
tractors
no,
and equipment
no,
and
no, we won't ever
animals
park
and,
enough. No,
Yeah.
we did,
okay.
Yeah, basically everything you see in the picture.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, Marvin?
Mr. Chair, one more question. I may have missed it. What year was that first chicken barn that burnt down? What year was that built?
1969, they started and they finished it in 70.
Okay, so that was at that for,
Yeah.
50 years basically,
Yeah.
like that. So it's been there for some time and it hasn't created an issue. The next question is on Brent's deal, and I don't know how the rest of it feel about having a manure management plan or being just a tier one if it's unnecessary, or willingness to work with feedlot officer and not being a problem with that.
Yeah, me and Rob talked about that already. We're like my manure and stuff, like if we do got a pile, we gotta move the pile around. Otherwise, we're under, for like hauling out, we got enough land to cover it on, is that what you were asking?
Yes, basically that, or do we need to put a condition of having a manure management plan, something to that extent? I don't know how the rest of them feel about this.
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead, Amy.
I think when you're putting a condition on, you have to look at what is the nexus between the encroachment on the road right-of-way and the need for a manure management plan. Certainly would be how clean out happens, that it's not on this end of the barn, that it's not stockpiled between the road and the barn. However, the manure management plan in and of itself probably does not have a nexus to what is being asked here.
Okay, I was concerned about working with Rob and having manure, because we hear complaints about that continuously. And if we have something here, paper, willingness to do that, more apt to being okay with this variance at that.
Right, it just needs to be tied to the impact of what he's asking for, and I don't believe a full-blown manure management plan would tie into it, but when it comes to clean out and storage of that before it's land applied, that definitely would have a nexus.
Okay, thank you.
At this point, he will become a registered feedlot, though, and will be subject to regular inspections.
That's correct.
Or- Okay, so those things would be addressed, I think, in the inspections, too.
Okay,
So,
perfect, thank you.
Yep. I remember this variance is for, not for you, it's for the property. And, we might be very comfortable with the things you're doing there, but we need to remember that this variance would go to the next owner, and so we may need to have conditions in place to make sure that, they follow the spirit of our meeting tonight.
Yeah.
I think we can be fairly confident in what you're doing, because you already have been doing that, but we're not so sure about the next owner. So I guess I would think that a condition that, as the county engineer discussed, no activity between the, as far as manure load out, possibly load out, but no storage there,
Yeah.
or no parking there of a manure spreader with a full load of manure, or things like that.
Yeah.
No activity between the road
Yeah.
and no other buildings, of course.
Yeah.
So, is that something we need, is a condition like that? Are you guys comfortable with adding that?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
That was actually one of the conditions that I was going to recommend, was to address this whole right-of-way issue, since we are talking about that encroachment there, to make sure that we cover the county engineer's concerns as well.
Do we need, do we need to have the rebuild thing in there? I mean, a permit is required if there would ever be a rebuild, and it would be a cut, but what do you think, Amy, as far as land services goes? If there's
It's hard to say what the regulations would be at that time. As far as we may not have this setback. And so having a condition that's prescriptive, assuming that the same requirements will be in ordinance might not give as much flexibility in the future. I would, it's, and if this happens again, which I really hope it doesn't,
Me too.
that the lesson's been learned, hopefully. And then that, and if it is built without a permit at that time, and if it does require variance, it's gonna be right back in front, and then that track record's gonna be discussed, so.
And just having a condition doesn't necessarily mean it would be enforced prior to a rebuild.
Correct.
But I think the
Yeah.
condition would be to meet the setbacks, whatever they might be at that time.
Yes, if it were to be replaced, that it meet all applicable setbacks at the time. And essentially what that does is it allows the variance for this particular building, but then any subsequent, because variances run with the land, they technically could rebuild again in the same spot under that variance. So it would prevent this from being rebuilt over and over in the same spot.
Okay. So is that a yes or a no? As to,
I think yes, I mean, you certainly could.
Okay, then I think I'd like to see that condition added, that, if this structure ever needs to be rebuilt again, that it would meet existing
not.
variances at the time.
Yeah, hopefully.
So then I guess we'd have two condition, okay? Now, who's registering a feedlot? Who needs to do that? Is that the landowners?
Yes, the landowner.
How do landowners know that they need to be a registered feedlot? I mean, we know, but how do landowners know?
Typically, we're aware of farm operations that are at the level that need to be registered. But this is a perfect example of one that we were not, and it slips through the cracks. So it's certainly something that we are generally aware of. Property owners generally, when they get to be that size, are aware that they need to be registered or need to be interacting with our office, because sometimes the contracts that they have require that they are legally established and all of that. So there's a few different ways that it gets caught. This one, unfortunately, was not.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. All right, other questions for the applicant?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Clint.
Okay, Tim, so what brought this forward is you didn't get a building permit for that one 18 by 18 shed you had. You didn't get a building permit for this, this barn. Can you explain your thought process or reasoning why you didn't get one? Or, I think that's kind of a thorn in the land services side on this subject.
Well, when it burnt, I figured, well, I wanted to keep doing what I was doing, and I really thought, being that I was building on the same footprint, I didn't think I was, with that one there, being that I didn't change anything, I thought should be able to rebuild it again, That's what, on the barn, that's a part of it that I.
How about that 18 by 18?
And that was just a quick throw for putting my tools in for my construction stuff. I just threw it up quick and,
So do you understand, you know anything about feedlot permits or any of that stuff that you'd ever dream that you'd have to get one, or?
Well, realistically, until probably the year before the barn, we were still under our, because we only had the sows then, but then we're starting to get stuck with feeding some of the little ones out, and, that's what sort of, would have threw us over the loop, And now that it burnt, I'm gonna redo it, so it's gonna be a lot less work. I'm doing it smarter instead of working harder,
And then have them building permits been taken care of, Amy? So you'd have to, we don't know how the vote's gonna be tonight, but if it would get approved, that's gonna be probably a condition, well, that will be a condition,
Yeah.
that the building permits get taken care of
Yeah.
and cut up,
Yeah.
okay?
Okay.
So, I don't know if I had any more questions, but I just wanted to address the board if I could, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Clint.
So my observation of this, it's been in the family since 1909. There's been a barn in that spot since 1970. Everything that we look at in any kind of confinement barn, over the restrictions we've had over the last few years, we worry about vegetation buffer, we worry about trees. This one has it. He has trees out front. He has vegetation buffer. When I was out there at our site visit, along with you guys, I looked, the eastern edge of this barn is dead center of the house, and it lines up perfect with the grain bin. This farm's been here since 1909. It's no farther forward than the house or anything else on the farm. I understand public safety and all. I had a discussion with the county engineer about this 200-foot setback, because you guys all know how I feel about it. But part of it was just parking things and being for the safety. I don't know. But that's just some observation I seen, and I think that we should really think about, well, I'll save my other comment for when when I'm answering the question, because I got something else, but I think that's it.
Okay, thank you, Clint. Anybody else before we go to public comment? Okay, the meeting is now open for public comment. If you have a comment to make, go up to the podium, state your name for the record, and whatever comment you might have.
John Holtz, a neighbor of Tim and Chris. I'm here to support them and prove that they've been doing a great job. My hardest point is this 200-foot setback. It's going to influence a lot of people. And putting a condition on them that they cannot use that area between their barn and the road, I think is completely wrong. If that's the case, we're going to have to put conditions on every house that parks a car in front of their garage, their road right away. I just came here today, I came on a river road, there was a car parked on the riverside that was no more than a foot off the white line. And here we're concerned about farmers using the area between their barn and the road. 200 feet's a long ways. So if we're gonna start putting these conditions on, that we can't use our 200 feet from the road to road right away, it's gonna be tough. It's a lot of land that's not used for hay bales or whatever else that can be stored there. I'm not saying manure should be stored there, that's the wrong place, but park a tractor there or something like that. What's the difference, you hit an oak tree or hit a tractor? Yes, we have to be sensible and we can be, but 200 feet's way too long, so I guess next time that comes up, hope you guys consider reducing that setback. 200 feet's a long ways. It's gonna influence a lot of people. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Any other public input? Any other public input? No further public input, we'll close the meeting to public input and proceed. Okay, ready for the questions? Okay, let's,
Mr. Chair,
yes, go ahead.
can you put on record what the site visit was?
I always forget that, the 26th. All five of us were there, plus Amy, at 1 o'clock. Thanks for reminding us of that. And we had a very good visit. Lots of good explanation there. All right, first question is the request in harmony with the general purposes and intent of the Morrison County Land Use Ordinance and Comprehensive Plan. Clint?
I think it is, when we look at being zoned ag, it's ag, ag use. And then we look, is it in harmony because it's too close to the road right away? I think it is. Because when we look through, I looked through Beacon, I spent 2 hours on Beacon. And if I go within 4 miles of this location, I think it was 15 farm sites I found that had animal holding units that were too close to the right of way. Some were 60 feet. I got 26 feet for one dairy barn, 22 feet for open lot. Like, go on and on. I got a whole list here. There's some that have open lots that are 1 feet from the road right away. So, might be wrong to prejudice ordinance. And when I say prejudice, if you don't have a feedlot permit, you can build a heck of a lot closer to the road. And there's just as much hazard and just as much safety what we recommended for this ordinance to be. So I think it's prejudiced against people with feedlot permits.
Okay, thank you, Clint. Anybody else? Go ahead, Marv.
I think a few more things to include here, as we had heard comment from the county engineer that he was okay with and had some concerns, and they were addressing them. I also look at the township, their letter of approval for it, and this barn basically been there for 50 years and hasn't been a problem in that time. So I believe it fits with everything in comprehensive plan.
Okay, thank you, Marv. Anybody else? I'd just like to add, the applicant's proposed use is very much in harmony with the intent and purposes of the ordinance. Very small feedlot, barely within the threshold of having to be a registered feedlot. 100% covered, very high bedding, heavy bedding that is, it doesn't have to be hauled, daily or anything, but it is hauled regularly as needed. He's working with engineers and a hog specialist and any contracts, and has to be guidelines there too. Again, like I stated earlier, I'm not concerned with the applicant. It's just, I think we need to do things to protect this spot because it will be a Tier 1 feedlot, and it may have a different use in the future. It may be a more intense use that spills over into right-of-way. I'm completely convinced that's not going to happen in the applicant's ownership. So that's the reason for the conditions that I thought should be proposed and adhered to. Anybody else on question number 1? Okay, number 2, is the applicant proposing to use the property in a reasonable manner not permitted by the land use ordinance? John?
I think it's more than reasonable. You're looking at a Tier 1 feedlot in ag zone. I don't know if anything needs to be said more than that.
Anybody else? Clint?
Mr. Chair?
Yep.
So when you look at our ag zoning, in our comprehensive land use goals and objectives, objective 1, it says ensure the county policies and ordinances do not restrict farming practices except as necessary to ensure compliance with law or to protect public health and safety. I think it's very reasonable what he's doing when we look at this objective, public health and safety. I see no difference between this barn where it is and the house being closer to the road or 55 other ones in the township he lives in. And it's a family farm since 1909. It's unfortunate that he lost everything a year ago or just about 11 months ago. And I think for him it's very reasonable for the applicants to just want to build what they had and continue on going. So I really do think it is reasonable.
Anybody else like to add to question number 2? Okay, we'll go on to number 3. Will the issuance of variance maintain the essential character of the locality? Marvin?
Absolutely. Ag area, as Clint pointed out earlier, to all the other farmsteads that were around within a few miles that were even closer than he is. And so ag, been in there 50 years, so it fits and fits well. Buffers are in there, everything's in place.
Anybody else like to add to number 3? I'd just like to add that very attractive structure, that bright red barn stands out as a symbol of rural living, of ag. And it's a much less imposing barn than the previous one, which was a 2-story structure. It looks nice, probably going to be a landmark. Go a mile past the red barn. It looks good in the area. It fits in with the rural character, ag character of the area. Anybody else on number 3? On to number 4, is alleged practical difficulty due to circumstances unique to the property. Brent?
Well, this is kind of a unique circumstance, being that the electrical, as I understood, it was electrical fire that caused the building to burn. That's unique, but is it unique to the property? So, being unique to the property, I looked at your response to question number 4 regarding the practical difficulty and trying to meet the setbacks for the proposed use that you're trying to do. You really can't make it meet the east to west either. And being that this was a structure that was there, you're utilizing the existing footprint. So I think that's what's unique to this property. Building where a building was may not be allowed for the proposed use that you want to use it for now, where it may be allowed to build it right where it exists, if it wasn't going to be used in the way you intend to use it. So that in lies, I think, the practical difficulty here. It would be okay if it was just a rebuild for a building. But now that it's a feedlot, it changes that. And so I think that's what's unique about this on this property. It's been existing there, somebody said already, since 1970, almost 50 years, been in the family much longer than that. And they're going to use the existing structure now that's up for ag use. So I think that's all unique to this particular piece of property, trying to cover that practical difficulty.
Thank you, Brent. Anybody else? On to number 5, is the need for the variance created by actions other than the landowner or prior landowners? My turn to start. Yeah, I guess he's the guy that didn't get the permit. But he's lived there all his life. This has been in the family forever. It's what he's known, it's what he's worked with all his life. It was just natural for him to think that, yeah, been no problem, we'll just continue with this. I think the actions of the landowner were reasonable and what others would have done, could have done, might have done. So that's my answer. Anybody else on number 5? Number 6, does the alleged practical difficulty involve more than just economic considerations? Clint?
Yeah, definitely. What we've talked about through this whole process, it's been in the family since 1909. The old barn was in 1970. You drive by, it's a landmark. You turn up there, turn right or left by the chicken barn on the end of the road. Now it's going to be a new landmark that's a red barn up on the end of the road. I think Mr. Stish said it in his last answer. It's just what the family has known. He built it right where it was. I don't think the only thing really by building it where it was just to save some of that concrete. But other than that, by him putting it anywhere else, it's going to cost the same money. So by him doing what he's doing, it's about the same cost. So yes, there's a lot more factors that went into this, and his practical difficulty going along with what Brett said, with the way the rules change, and I'll say it one more time for the commissioners in the back, the prejudiced ordinance that we have. I think that's what it goes along with that. So I would say yes to number 6, that it does practical, the alleged practical difficulty involves more than just the economics.
Okay, thank you, Clint. Anybody else? And also, I think, we get requests for variances to build within the setback of the road right away. And more often than not, we grant them. That might have been the case in this instance. Could well have been.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, John.
I'm hearing what you guys are saying. It's been in the family since 1909. At the end of the day, you have a letter from the engineer that says there's a place to put this thing, and you have the ability to build it in a spot that meets all setbacks. I'm just stating that for the record because you're going to have some questions that come up here that are going to require that, in addition to, everything else is in line and true with everything you said. But at the end of the day, we weren't following rules, and we weren't following permitting, and that's the end of it. It doesn't mean it doesn't fit within the zoning, and it doesn't fit within the ordinance and the comprehensive plan, and it's definitely a reasonable request. It's not changing any character, but, when you're looking at the questions directly, 1909 or not 1909, it's still you got 40 acres, right?
Yeah, it's more than that. Yep. Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
I just rebuttal a little bit what John said. I totally agree. That's why we asked the applicants if it'd be fine with them. The whole hiccup here is we're too close to the road. To mitigate that, and what the county engineer stated, to mitigate that, that's why we're gonna put the condition on that you can't put anything in between the barn and the road. Back in the manure spreader up the load's fine, but not stockpiling manure, leaving it sit there all day, piling hay bales, things like that, his feed tanks, which he said he wasn't gonna. So that's why we asked that mitigates. Maybe not to everybody, but to me, so.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Clint. Brent.
just a pigtail on, no pun intended here, what Clint had just said. We're not talking about no use of the land between the barn and the road. We're talking about the road right of way, which is the setback from the, you still utilize that land and the road and driving around. It's the road right of way that we're talking about. So public comment was talking about that as well. That's what we're addressing here.
Correct. And we gotta remember this is a 131-foot encroachment onto that right of way, so it's a reasonable condition. All right, are we ready for the vote? Okay. Proceed to vote. Is the request in harmony with the general purpose and intent of the Morrison County Land Use Ordinance and Comprehensive Plan? Clint?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Marvin?
Yes.
Brent?
Yes.
And myself is yes. Number 2, is the applicant proposing to use the property in a reasonable manner not permitted by the land use ordinance? John?
Yes.
Marvin?
Yes.
Brent?
Yes.
Myself is yes. Clint?
Yes.
Number 3, will the issuance of the variance maintain the essential character of the locality? Marvin?
Yes.
Brent?
Yes.
Myself is yes. Clint?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Number 4, is alleged practical difficulty due to circumstances unique to the property? Brent?
Yes.
Myself is yes. Clint?
Yes.
John?
No.
And Marvin?
Yes.
Okay. Number 5, is the need for the variance created by actions other than the landowner or prior landowners? Myself is yes. Clint?
Yes.
John?
No.
Marvin?
Yes.
And Brent?
Yes.
Number 6, does the alleged practical difficulty involve more than just economic considerations? Clint?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Marvin?
Yes.
Brent?
Yes.
And myself is yes. Okay, all the questions have been answered to the affirmative. Is there a motion?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
One thing, because this is an after the fact, before you make or ask for a motion, you should have the discussion on whether or not you want to apply the after the fact criteria or not.
Yeah. How about if we just go through them quickly? Everybody okay with that? Okay. So do you have them on a slide? Okay. So that everybody can follow along. Everybody. Why did the applicant fail to obtain a variance or comply with the applicable requirements before commencing work? Did the applicant act in good faith? Why or why not? Anybody care to tackle that question?
Mr. Chair, the way I looked at it at first, when the building burnt down, I thought, personally, he could replace it in kind exactly the same way the other. So I thought in good faith he did that.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, number two, did the applicant attempt to comply with the law by obtaining the proper permits? Why or why not? Anybody on answer that one?
I think he addressed it in his previous line of questioning about, and what you just said about his ability to just build where the current footprint exists. But the attempt to comply, as it's stated in the question, probably, I mean, not unless you would say you attempted to comply.
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead,
The
Mark.
other thing I would like to respond, when they received the letter, as soon as they received the letter complaint, they got a hold of Land Services and addressed it.
Okay. Good point. Anybody else? Number two?
Just to follow up on number two, I think that's why we're here tonight. They're trying to, correct and make this come in conformance with by obtaining the proper permits, and in order to get the permits, you got to have the variance to do so.
Thank you. Anybody else? And number three is not really applicable. Did not obtain, but there's no other entity obtain permits from. Did the applicant make a substantial investment in the property? I think we'd all agree he did, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Did the applicant complete the repairs before the applicant was informed of the impropriety? Pretty much yes. We were witnesses on the site to that. Is the nature of the property residential, recreational, not commercial? I'm not sure how that one applies, if at all here. It's agricultural and it's an ag use, so not sure how that question would apply. Anybody have a thought?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
just that it's in ag.
Yeah.
It isn't listed here, it's in ag. There isn't no residential in the immediate vicinity or commercial or anything else. It's out in ag, and that's what his use is. So maybe that's just how I'd answer without it saying ag in the question.
Yeah, I think so. Anybody else? Okay, thank you. Number seven, are there other similar structures in the vicinity, we'll say, rather than on the lake? And obviously, this looks like a barn, it fits in the area. I don't know if we need any more than that. Number eight, would the minimum benefits of to the county appear to be far outweighed by the detriment to the applicant, that the applicant would suffer if forced to remove the structure? Okay, that's a good question. Would the benefits outweigh, or to the county outweigh the detriment to the applicant if we made him meet the setbacks?
No way.
I agree with that. I look at also what we approved down south of Boldus, almost exactly the same thing.
Sure. All right, we're all in agreement on that. In light of all the above factors, would denying the variance serve the interests of justice? I think we've answered that already. Everybody comfortable with that one? Okay, applying the above criteria, has the applicant made a showing of practical difficulty? Yes or no? Marvin?
Absolutely, yes.
John?
Yes, with this criteria.
Myself is yes. Clint,
Yes.
and Brent.
Yes.
Okay, so
Mr.
go back
Chair?
to the,
I'd like to make a motion that we approve this request with the two conditions. One being, that the building permits be obtained and taken care of, upon, or before completion. And then, the one about, building in between the barn and the road setback.
I'll second that.
okay, how many conditions do we have, Amy?
2.
Okay. Everybody understands the conditions? Okay. Any other discussion on the motion? Okay, if not, we'll proceed to vote. Roll call vote. All in favor of the motion, say aye. Opposed, say nay. Clint?
Aye.
Marvin?
Aye.
Brent?
Aye.
Myself is aye. And John?
Aye.
Your variance request has been approved with great detail.
So the next step is to come in and apply for the permits for both of those buildings.
All right.
Okay?
Good luck with your endeavors.
Thank you, guys.
I didn't sign mine either, Amy.
Okay, that concludes our business for the evening, other than minutes of the previous meeting. Is there a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second that.
Go ahead. Motion made and seconded to approve the minutes. All in favor, say aye.
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 Minutes accepted as presented. Any other old business,
I don't have any, Mr. Chair.
new business?
None of that either.
All right. Motion to adjourn.
I so move.
I'll second that. All in favor, say aye.
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 Meeting adjourned at 7:19.